Time out to join us today. First, from your right, we have Mr. Édes, Director of the Asian Development Bank's Poverty Reduction, Gender and Social Development Division, and Chairman of ADB's 220-member Social Development and Poverty Community of Practice. Next, we have Mr. Shrestha from Change Fusion Institute. He is the founder and has raised and managed projects worth over $3 million focusing on social innovation development. We have Ms. Santos from Ateneo. She is a social entrepreneur with rich field knowledge as well as combined technical and managerial skills from her experience working in the Philippines, the Asian region, and the United States. Next, we have Mr. Agrwal from Intellecap. He is co-founder of Intellecap and has worked with leading microfinance institutions in India and helped many of these institutions in their fundraising efforts. We have Mr. Chowdhury, a founder from mPower, which is a global social enterprise specializing in building processes and systems that helps organizations to establish for better decision-making and results-based monitoring. This panel is sponsored by Asian Development Bank. Mr. Édes, I will hand over the mic to you.
Now, thank you so much. And for those of you who are up at high elevations, I would invite you to come on down to join us and make this a little bit more of an informal and intimate session. We will keep it informal, and we're going to ensure that those of you who have questions or views to share will have an opportunity. We're very briefly going to get some different, say, national perspectives on the the social enterprise setting in a handful of countries around Asia and the Pacific. It's the only session at this Impact Forum that is taking this approach, looking country by country. And through this, we hope to get some ideas of where are there common challenges, where are there differences, where is there good practice that might be able to be applied elsewhere. So without further ado, let's start on the far end of the panel to get a little perspective on what is happening in Bangladesh, a country that in some ways is seen as a leader of social enterprise development. Would that be a fair label, Mridul?
I think, that would not be unfair. Is it on?
Push it up. Try tapping. There you go.
Is it on? Oh. Yeah, so I mean, having institutions like BRAC and Grameen, who have been global leaders in innovation in a number of sectors, I would be thinking it's fair to say that Bangladesh has been leading a lot of social innovations around the globe. So just to get to the issue at hand today. So basically, I represent this company called a for-profit enterprise called mPower, which basically works with the non-profit world, with NGOs, with governments, and helping them realize the potential of using mobile technologies for getting services out to rural areas or to remote areas, and also to use mobile technologies for different kinds of monitoring and program management purposes. So that's basically what I do. So now I've been working in the area of social enterprise for quite some time. I actually worked for the UNDP. I worked for the government of Bangladesh. I also co-founded an NGO at one point. So basically, I've been working in several stakeholders across the development space, mostly in the area of, mostly in Bangladesh. So basically, just to map out, what is happening in the area of social enterprise in Bangladesh. So broadly, as we would actually find out in a lot of other countries as well, that broadly there are essentially two kinds of social enterprises that have been emerging. One is obviously the non-profit world. The NGO sector has been evolving in certain ways. So that has been one trend. And the NGO world has been evolving into the social enterprise space, but still retaining its non-profit status. So that has been one trend broadly. The other trend has been just for-profit enterprises, purely for-profit enterprises that have emerged. So I'll talk about both these trends, particularly in the case of Bangladesh. So in the area of non-profit world, we are basically seeing that, a lot of non-profit NGOs mostly are sort of I mean, teaming up with corporations and creating new entities. I mean, non-profit entities. I mean, Grameen possibly started the trend in that a couple of years ago. I mean, when it teamed up with a company called Danone, which is a yogurt manufacturer in France. So they basically teamed up. This Grameen, the NGO, teamed up with this corporation and basically decided to make low-cost yogurt for the rural population. So that actually started the trend. Then I mean, it actually started a couple of years ago. Then we saw a number of other NGO, private corporation collaborations taking place. Another interesting collaboration that I can think of in Bangladesh has been between Bata, which is a big international shoemaker, Unilever, which is again a big international retailer of different cosmetic products, and Care International, which is again another international NGO. So these three have come together and formed a new non-profit entity called JITA. And what they basically do is they send out field officers, I mean, women, entrepreneurial women who sell items produced by Bata and Unilever and make a living out of it. So that's been another trend. So that's one. The other trend that has come up is that some corporations on their own, I mean, not really teaming up with others, on their own have sort of created a non-profit arm based on the supply chain and the distribution channel that they have. So they have created a non-profit arm in a related business. And one example that comes to mind is a company called Rohim Afroz in Bangladesh, which is a big battery manufacturer, possibly the biggest battery manufacturer in Bangladesh. And they have basically come up with a non-profit company called RSF, Rural Services Foundation, which creates and distributes solar-powered batteries across the nation. And one of the things that they have been able to do is because, I mean, they are a battery manufacturer and they have huge distribution channels, supply chains across the country, networked across the country. So they've been able to use that same distribution channel to essentially market their solar-powered batteries. So that has been another trend. So for-profit corporations, coming up with non-profit companies leveraging on the resources that they already have. And in the for-profit sector, which is, I mean, in Bangladesh at least, the for-profit social enterprises are actually far fewer in number. I mean, there are actually a handful of them. And it may be different from other countries, as we will find out. But, I mean, one reason for that, maybe, and it's just a maybe, is that the whole social enterprise or the social business revolution in Bangladesh was sort of spearheaded by Professor Yunus. And his definition of social business has, I mean, very significantly influenced this whole space. And his definition of social business is very much a non-profit world. I mean, it's basically kind of the traditional NGO model with certain differences, but it's still a non-profit world. So that has kind of dominated, and that may be one of the factors why the for-profit social enterprise sector has not really evolved in Bangladesh. So in the for-profit world, the kind of social enterprises we see, I mean, one are the kinds of some enterprises which basically, are focused on making profits. But what they say is that they're going to donate or contribute part of their profits to social causes, and significant part of their profits to social causes. So that's what makes them a social enterprise, as opposed to a typical foundation which would donate 1 or 2% to foundations and so on. So you have things of that sort. Like BrackNet, an example is an example that comes to mind, which is essentially an ISP, which makes profits in all sense of the term. But they have a significant portion of their profits going out for core BRAC purposes. So that's one kind of social enterprise. The other kind of social enterprise are the ones who have a dual focus on profit and also social impact. I mean, which are the kinds of social enterprises that we are talking about in this forum mostly, where Arong. I mean, anybody who has been to Bangladesh has possibly been to Arong. Basically, that's another for-profit arm of BRAC, and their social goal is to basically empower and employ women in rural areas, and their products are being sold through these retail stores. Arong is essentially a retail store. Water Health has recently established its operations in Bangladesh. It's again a kind of a collaboration between IFC, a business conglomerate in Bangladesh and another local entity. So they are a for-profit entity in all sense of the term, and they're basically selling water at low cost in various parts of the country. mPower, the company that I represent, is also another one of those companies, which are essentially for-profit social enterprises. In terms of broad level sectors which seem to be doing well in Bangladesh and which don't seem to be doing all that well in Bangladesh, I would say that health, animal health, agriculture, energy, retail, I mean, these are the sectors that are relatively doing better in Bangladesh. And my personal observation is that, you know, those sectors where you have a clear willingness to pay and the benefits are sort of immediate, those are the sectors that are doing better. Like in the area of health, the benefits are immediate. Animal health, agriculture, energy, I mean, you get benefits immediately. I mean, you pay some price and you get a benefit almost immediately. And also another factor that has sort of come into the picture is this culture of what service or product should be paid for and what service or product should be free. And that is one of the challenges that water health actually has faced, because in Bangladesh, the culture is that water is a product that should be free. I mean, Bangladesh is also known as a land of rivers. So it's not like the Middle East where people have for decades, for ages, seen water as a commodity that they would be willing to pay for. So in Bangladesh, it's not that scenario. So in a country like Bangladesh, where you're actually trying to get, sell water, it becomes much more difficult. Because, I mean, the other factor, I mean, along that line, the other factor is that, I mean, the sectors which have a lot of fake or alternatives, I mean, those sectors are much more difficult to grow. Like, for instance, water is one. I mean, there are lots of other alternative water service providers which are much lesser cost, which are much more lesser quality, but the people don't know a lot about it. So I mean, one aspect of social enterprise, I mean, that I've seen, I mean, going on to the challenges bit, is that that when we are devising social enterprise strategies, when we're devising projects and interventions, a lot of the times we often do not think about the communications strategy. I mean, when we devise, I mean, when we actually make a project proposal, when we say, what are the things that we're going to use money for, I mean, often the whole communications bit is sort of left out. But if you really see that, in a lot of the things that we're trying to sell, like solar-powered battery, health, water, I mean, these are areas where you actually have to change cultures of people, change mindsets of people, and not enough is being done towards that front. I mean, we're basically setting up an organization and just going out there and selling. And investors also, I mean, if you tell an investor that I would want to spend 10% of my money of my funding on communication strategies, on influencing behavior, investors will not understand that. So I think that's a big gap in the investor space as well, in the understanding of the importance of communications in a lot of these. And the other big challenge here is the missing middle problem, which I think that a lot of the investors are basically looking to give a multi-million dollar and make investments. But a lot of the enterprises, particularly in Bangladesh, are actually not to that extent where they can absorb a multi-million dollar investment. But there is no entity that can basically cater to that part of the space. So in terms of investment, investor space in Bangladesh, I mean, there are very few. I mean, SEAF is one of those investors who is actually represented here. But other than that, I don't know a lot about social investors in Bangladesh. And most of the investment is actually happening in the area of agriculture anyway. So if you want me to elaborate on any point later on, I can do that. But for now, I think it's...
Mridul, thank you very much. That's a very concise overview of a country, and I'm sure it's much more nuanced than that, but that's a great start. And I know that as we start moving down across the panel, we're going to start seeing the distinctions between countries that at a regional forum, they sometimes get overshadowed. This takes us now to Anurag, who's working with an organization that knows social enterprises perhaps better than any other in India. You've done extensive surveys and research, and that has led you to various findings and conclusions, and this is a great forum in which you can share them. If you also notice a few of the observations made in Mridul's points about Bangladesh, you might want to seize one or two points where you see either overlap or something different that's happening in India. Please.
Yeah, so just a quick introduction. I represent Intellecap. Intellecap is an advisory company operating for the last 10 years in the social enterprise space. We primarily work in, so we run various business functions, and what we are trying to build is an ecosystem to support social enterprises for scaling and growth. The way we look at social enterprise is slightly different from what Mridul described in terms of we exclusively work with for-profit social enterprises. And this is a phenomenon that we are noticing is also gaining momentum within India. So what used to be, so in areas related to development, what used to be mostly NGO activities till say about 7-8 years back, from 2005-6 onwards, there is a very clear trend that we are noticing that people who want to do something in the space, want to do something related to development, are increasingly going in for the for-profit model. So actually we carried out a survey of about 95 social enterprises within India. And maybe what I'll do is just very quickly just share some high-level findings from that. So in this survey that we conducted, actually less than 20% of the companies were 5 years old. So actually the space is relatively new. And the companies that we're talking about were still very, very young and in their early days. Majority of them, in fact, a very large majority of them were structured as private limited companies. So these were for-profit companies. And as one would imagine, very aggressively pursuing capital. Most of the entrepreneurs who were surveyed did mention that a lot of their time, a good chunk of their time was actually just going and pursuing capital rather than actually pursuing the business that they were doing. So this takes up a lot of time of the entrepreneurs. And a lot of them we also noticed were investing very heavily in building a very high quality team, because this was also one of the critical factors for attracting capital, and then the for-profit social enterprise model for it to scale and be sustainable. So they were not building teams just for the here and now, but for the longer term, and investing in that quite heavily. Another trend that we noticed was that most of these social enterprises that have come into prominence were located in the 4 or 5 metro cities, with a very heavy concentration in the south and the west. So the north and the eastern part of the country is still relatively underpenetrated, and I would say that the fact that we found people in the metros is not so much that there are no social enterprises in the smaller towns and cities. They are somewhat undiscovered. So there is a lot of activity. Maybe they don't call themselves as social enterprises, but they are into businesses which do definitely make a lot of social impacts, but they are undiscovered, so to say. Also, we looked at models which were also looking at BOP customers as well as producers. Almost 75% of these companies were focused on dealing with BOP people as customers as opposed to producers. So a lot of them were trying to make products and services catering to these people as customers. They were, as I mentioned, very small in size. So on an average, they would barely exceed $100,000 in revenue. So that's about 50 lakh rupees in Indian currency. And most of them would have less than 20 employees. Almost 80% of them will have less than 20 employees. So these are still relatively small. Although that trend is emerging in India as well, the talk of collaboration with corporates, and the corporates themselves getting their hands dirty and getting in, not just looking at this as a CSR activity, but as a core business activity. And we ourselves in Intellecap are quite actively engaged in forging those relationships between large corporates and social enterprises in areas of water, healthcare, energy. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that. And actually a lot of this is also very actively getting supported by the DFIs. So there's a lot of funding that's also available for encouraging corporates to shake hands with social enterprises and doing things at scale. So there's a lot of impetus on scale. In terms of mindset, what we've noticed is that a lot of these entrepreneurs, while they have gotten into this business with the objective of creating impact, but in their day-to-day working, their focus is primarily on business and generating profit. So that's a very clear objective in their mind, and they don't in their day-to-day thinking think so much about what kind of impact I'm making and how I'm measuring it. A lot of that push comes, if at all, from the investors. But as far as the entrepreneurs are concerned, they're mostly looking at how do I run my business and how do I make it profitable. And a lot of these guys are pre-break-even stage. So for them, that's a question of survival as well. Also, they are very, very capital hungry. So almost everybody, only 7% of the companies that we interviewed were actually not looking for capital. The rest of them were all looking for capital. And 78% were looking for equity capital. So these are for-profit companies looking to raise equity capital from investors with a expectation of return. There were, of course, at a startup stage, a lot of them were raising money from friends, family, and grants still contributed an important portion of early stage institutions. But the vast majority were looking for equity capital and wanted to scale their business in a commercial manner and provide a return to investors. In terms of challenges, it's the usual challenges of capital, talent, building supply chains for especially those companies which were looking at these customers as producers of the products in handicraft and other areas was a very important challenge for them. In terms of sectors, we've seen a lot of activity in energy and agri sector in particular. These are the two sectors where there were maximum new social enterprises that were created. Healthcare and education, there's a lot of demand, but the issue is that it needs a larger amount of capital and longer gestation periods. So not so much in terms of number of enterprises, but yes, there is a lot of activity happening in those areas as well. So yeah, I guess that's in a nutshell what were the key findings of this survey.
That's great. And at this relatively early stage in development of the social enterprise sector in the region, having these kinds of surveys that really try and get at depth and establish some trends can be very useful to everyone, including investors. Moving from South Asia, and we didn't divide things up intentionally, but we move into Southeast Asia, into the ASEAN region, starting with the Philippines. Tieza is working with Ateneo de Manila University, which is pretty much a preeminent academic institution looking at social enterprises, so she's in a good position to offer a view on some of these same topics from the Philippine perspective.
Good afternoon. Just a brief introduction. I come from the Center for Social Entrepreneurship. It's a new center under the university. And we're basically focused on conducting research initiatives, trainings for grassroots and startup social enterprises. And at the same time, we're in the process of developing an incubator program to help emerging enterprises in the Philippines. Now, when we talk about social enterprises initiatives in the Philippines, it is seen within the perspectives of inclusive growth and development, with the prospects of ensuring equitable distribution of basic goods and services. And surprisingly, the intent among government officials and civil society organizations, including private sector, to achieve such is without a question. But what surprises me is the fact that in spite this good intention, the economy seems to be mired in tepid and erratic growth for the past decade, leading me to question whether inclusive development is really taking place. Now, for the past 2 to 3 decades, development work has been really tremendous. We have a very strong civil society network serving as the middle brother, or what we call those who bridge the gap, serving as market intermediaries to fill the missing middle, serving basic services that the governments failed to do. Now here's the thing. The country's economy was recently reported during the first quarter to have improved with about 6.4% growth during the first quarter of the year. And it's seen as the fastest growth in Asia, next only to China. And hardly anyone expected it to be that high. And one of the reasons is that the 40 richest Filipinos, whose collective wealth rose from about 13 billion over the past year to 47.4 billion US dollars, jumped to about 37.8%. And this actually stirred a lot of interest among young social entrepreneurs, particularly, and corporate organizations, wanting to, with the realization that this has to be So I was saying, young social entrepreneurs and even corporate organizations and civil societies realized that goods and services need to be redistributed and reallocated. And the social enterprise in the Philippines, at least for the term itself, is something new, but the practice has been ongoing. So there's a strong talent, an emerging talent within this sector. And the sector is emerging actually differently from those in other countries, such as compared to Europe. Because in Europe, for instance, a plural economy is recognized, strengthening social and solidarity economies beyond market economy alone. But developing economies like the Philippines would steer interest among civil societies, like I mentioned, individuals and collective groups to address market failures and failure of state institutions in order to address social issues, particularly the various aspects of poverty, and with the poor as the primary stakeholders. Now, at present, we see emerging innovations in the fields of agriculture because the Philippines has a strong base of agriculture sector. And for the longest time, we have been trying to improve this sector with the land reforms and all of those social activism taking place on the ground. Renewable energy, healthcare, cultural and ecotourism, technology, of course, microfinance are also gaining momentum with the various efforts from social enterprises. But areas that require much attention are education, water, sanitation, environment conservation, and other basic services such as social justice are lagging behind, simply because these are falling on the social innovation side, and a lot of investors couldn't find the enterprise component of it, or at least the revenue stream within this sector. And the number of entrepreneurs in the country is growing with a primary mission to address social ills. And in an ADB Commission study conducted by the School of Government under the university where I am part of, they cited a 2007 research conducted by the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia, revealing that there are about 30,000 social enterprises in the Philippines, and it is comprised of 93% small, medium, and big cooperatives, while around 500 are small and big microfinance institutions, and approximately 26 fair trade organizations. And then other social enterprises are NGO-initiated, and those who are transitioning from a donor-driven or grant-funded social nonprofit organizations. And then after this 2007 study, we found out that the number seems to be growing in response to the, this urgency to commit or address the demands of the UN Millennium Development Goals by 2015. And there's a strong commitment, and there's a need to improve the Philippines' competitiveness, not just in the Asian region, but globally. Additionally, civil society groups, and a huge number averaging in several thousands, for instance, are realizing the fact that their initiatives should no longer be donor-driven. Private corporations are also realizing the need to shift to a more socially relevant business models, realizing the impact of investments for social good. And very interesting, the government is now realizing its many failures to deliver the necessary goods and services to the people, and it's now opening its doors and engaging with social enterprises such as Gawad Kalinga through its nationwide community building program, Bote Central in partnership with the Department of Social Welfare and Development through its Kapit Buhay program, and Change Lab in partnership with local government units through its proposed sustainable micro enterprise development programs, and many others. So there's a strong emerging private-public sector partnership and corporate social entrepreneurship, as what we call in our university, wherein governments and corporations are opening its doors to emerging enterprises. And of course, very interesting thing to note, there's an increasing initiative taking place among social enterprises who recently formed a present coalition to engage the representatives in Congress to lobby for the passage of the Social Enterprise Bill in the Philippines, and of course, the stronger implementation of the Barangay Microenterprise Business Act. And finally, there are also efforts to provide an inclusive, mutually supportive social enterprise ecosystem in the country, with the emergence of organizations such as the Philippine Social Enterprise Network, or PhilSen, PBSP, Asian Social Enterprise Incubator, Collab Exchange, Idea Space, Inspire Pilipinas, /Ignite, to name a few. So they're basically providing mentoring, incubation, soft skills training. Some are providing seed funding, for instance, Idea Space, because it's run by a corporation. And the finance sector is also realizing its crucial role in the development and is opening up facilities that offer seed fund, soft loans, and equity. And even academic institutions like where I come from is very strong in its commitment to support this growing sector by putting up centers such as the Ateneo Innovation Center under the School of Science and Engineering to help improve technological innovation, and of course the Center for Social Entrepreneurship. So we're basically developing core programs that I mentioned: research, training, and incubation. So I think I'll stop there for now.
Tieza, if I understand correctly, not only are you approaching this topic from the perspective of academia, but you've also got your hands in a social enterprise yourself. Do you want to say a quick word about that?
Yes, I mentioned previously that an organization, Change Lab, that works with local governments. We basically help micro enterprises, particularly street food vendors. So I carried the hat of an academe and a practitioner as well.
Thanks for that. Well, we have one more country to take a look at before opening up to the audience, and also probing a bit on where some of the complementarity, some of the common elements in the sector may appear across the region. Sunit, you're looking at my microphone? Okay, well, I'll give it to you. But first I have to say that he's with Change Fusion that most of you have heard of, which has been playing for several years now a very key role in helping to develop this sector in Thailand, and beyond that working to develop regional cooperation on social enterprise development. So Sunit, please tell us about Thailand.
Yes. Hi, Sunit from Thailand. Nice to meet you all. I'm from Change Fusion. Basically, we are supporting social innovation, especially through social enterprise. And basically, we were trying to do whatever it takes to grow the enterprise and also grow the supporter, including with respect to the investment side also. We also run kind of like a small venture philanthropy program, as well as a small impact investment kind of holding investment company to grow the sector in Thailand. A little bit about Thailand. Let me first give you a little bit of context in terms of how Thailand is looking at social enterprise. I'm sure you have heard in the past few years how strange Thailand has become from the news. Not only that we got flooded last year, but before that we actually had some sort of civil war going on in Bangkok, and you can see like people, the red shirt, the yellow shirt, kind of fighting each other, kind of killing each other. And this actually, I think from the Philippines case, I think we have similar kind of context. Thailand is one of the worst country in ASEAN in terms of inequality, but maybe Philippines is also similar. But the rest of ASEAN, we are much worse. For example, like if you divide the family holding into 5 quintiles, like the richest group and the kind of poorest group, the first group of the richest people own almost 70% of national assets, including income, while the lowest group, the lowest 20%, own around less than 1%. The second poorest group, which is the second one, own collectively around 3%. So you are talking about a country where most of all the assets belong to very few group of people, and there are also they were looking at like the stock holding in Thailand. If you exclude all the international stock holding and look only in terms of Thai stock holding, that they found that probably 80 or 70% of market cap is actually owned by around 300 families. in Thailand. So that's where the context. So unless this kind of inequality kind of solve itself somehow, we're probably gonna see a very interesting challenge in Thailand for the next few years or decade. And this is where I think in the past few years, social enterprise has become quite an interesting model of inclusive growth in Thailand. I mean, we have somewhat okay infrastructure in terms of water or electricity penetration and so on, but in terms of other kind of growth, we have massive growth that for the past few decades, but when you look at the inequality, it become much worse over the past few decades as well. So that's where I think Thailand and social enterprise kind of come into play. People got really excited about how to create a more inclusive growth in different sectors, especially the growth sector in Thailand, that's already there. So like agriculture, then which can be more like sustainable agriculture. In terms of sector, I understand that at least, for example, the sustainable agriculture in terms of organic land use in Thailand had increased around like 1,700% over the past decade. Or like sustainable tourism is growing quite well, as well as other key area that are already like also in terms of renewable energy, although we had kind of electricity kind of coverage, and I think 90-something%, but we still import 20% or more of electricity from Laos. So one day we have some problem that, and our like northeast would be shut off, and it's mostly not from renewable energy. And actually, the government actually are trying to push for, I understand, like 3,700 megawatts. They kind of production by 2020, but right now only less than half of that has achieved from renewable energy, especially from rural area that can sell back to the grid. So the government has put up a good policy in terms of massive adders for renewable energies, and that's where you are seeing some social enterprise in community scale renewable energy, mostly less than 1 megawatt, kind of biomass, for example, gasification kind of plants being carried out in Thailand. A little bit in terms of because of this, especially because of the major conflict in Thailand in the last few years, the last government actually were looking at social enterprise as a way to solve this problem, and they set up like a national level committee and kind of come up with a master plan, 5-year master plan to address the problem. And they took mostly the model from, I think, kind of a UK kind of model a bit. So for them, social enterprise include like like the kind of community business we are talking about, or social enterprise per se, and cooperative and different other things, but they exclude completely non-profit. So if the non-profit want to set up a social enterprise, then it can set up as a private company that owned by the non-profit. So they actually come up with a definition a little bit, and also different support infrastructure in terms of get the master plan, and also set up a specific body called Thai Social Enterprise Office, which is promoting this social enterprise thing in Thailand, and also trying to do a listing of, kind of a name of research into the social enterprise names in Thailand. With respect to the numbers, the government actually did a survey, and because they are very broad, they had around like 100,000 something social enterprise classified in Thailand. But out of these, I think if you're looking at the new kind of social enterprise that many of us were talking about, like the company that were recently set up to specifically solve some sort of problems and to have a revenue model that it can grow, I think in Thailand, we probably are very, very early, maybe only around few of hundreds of these kind of enterprise being set up in Thailand over the past 5 to 10 years. And most of them are still very small. probably as similar to what you just mentioned, less than 20 people kind of thing, and very fragmented. So I think that's so around. They have some recent research show that there are around maybe 100 social enterprise that can be made investment ready with some work from the more like a venture cap, impact investment point of view, or some sort of PE kind of thing. But much more in terms of smaller community business that are social enterprise across Thailand. I think a more alternative model, such as some sort of loan funds or like SE kind of banks, similar to different countries, the extension of banking service to the local SE kind of thing would be interesting model to go for. I think, and also a little bit about how this impact investment and venture philanthropy is growing in Thailand is actually very, very new. But there are now a few organizations such as like a venture philanthropy program called Unlimited Thailand, which kind of brought the model from the UK that actually have started running a venture philanthropy program in Thailand, and few other groups. Also, there are few kind of impact investment kind of fund or some sort of structured in Thailand. Although in Thailand, our private equity law and fund-related law is very super regulated. So most of the companies or investment fund that were set up are using basically kind of investment holding company structures to do it. So, but it's very new and very few. There are now, I think this year there's so many exciting partnerships being announced. Like one of the biggest foundation in Thailand is partnering actually with Yunus Center at AIT and looking at launching like a Thailand social business investment fund, so which would actually be good. And they are willing to go in very early and take all the risks before and stimulate other investors to become like a follow-on or something there. And many business are now excited about getting more into it. In terms of general observations in Thailand, I think it's still very new in Thailand, and we need a clear example of success so that many more people got excited to get into the field. I think we don't have enough people knowing what social enterprise is or how successful it can become. So the entrepreneurs sometimes are not quite there. There are people like us who are supporting entrepreneurs who can't really find entrepreneurs anymore. So we have to promote that more. And I think second thing is diversity of financing models, like beyond the PE investment, venture capital type impact investment fund, maybe it's a more broader loan funds that are structured not for the growth, but just to repayment of the thing at the rural community. It might be also useful. Also, maybe the last thing is that many social enterprises that are emerging in Thailand, because of this context of inequality and social problems, they are becoming, some of them are getting into difficult category, like a little bit more like lifestyle or urban. There are many groups who are doing like tech development using like mobile technologies for disaster coordination, so disease surveillance, or kind of green shops and green living, like lifestyle publishing. That is not making money, but kind of had become quite popular among these social enterprises in Thailand, which create a little bit of problem from the investor side point of view, because many of the investors are super focused on like, okay, where's the poverty, where's the direct impact, and when there's kind of people who are working maybe at a support level as a social enterprise, maybe that they are into technologies that might not fit this criteria of more like urban and lifestyle kind of social enterprise. And I think I would just leave it at that. But it's a good country. Please come and visit. We still have good beach and everything.
You can plan your holiday after this session. We're going to turn to the audience in just a minute, because I know that after these 4 presentations you have some reactions, whether it's questions or you want to share experience from another country. But I did want to put out one question, and that concerns the role of the government. So we heard a little bit, particularly at this end of the panel, about how the government has set up an office to promote social enterprises. And in the Philippines, there's some talk of coordination and actually some steps in that direction. There's a coalition moving toward trying to get a bill through the Congress. Now, where are we in terms of strong central, or in the case of a federal state like India, state government support for social enterprises? I'm thinking, for example, of the kind of legislation that's been adopted in some North American or European countries to promote social enterprises, or even putting some serious money down, with perhaps the best example of that in the UK. But let's start there. In Bangladesh, how convinced is the government that this is an area that deserves support? Our mics seem to be dwindling, but there's one down there, and we can share this one here in ASEAN.
Yes, I mean, but the Bangladesh government does not have, I mean, any, formal understanding of social enterprises. I mean, they have not defined social enterprise. I mean, even in the last budget, I mean, there were certain lobby groups which were trying to, make the government kind of recognize this sector as an emerging sector. I mean, not even as a, as a sector that has to be legally registered, but just recognize that this is an emerging sector. That also did not come up in the last budget speech, so to say, by the finance minister. So what we are essentially doing to kind of bypass that. I mean, one of the things that is there in Bangladesh is that you get certain tax breaks if you are an IT company. So what we are essentially doing is that we have basically registered ourselves as an IT company to get those kinds of benefits that a typical IT company would get. So certain tax breaks for a certain number of years. So those are some of the workarounds that people are finding. And then there are other organizations which are also somewhat tangentially related to IT. They would also kind of categorize themselves as an IT company and then try to get those tax breaks. So that's the space. That's the scenario in Bangladesh right now.
Yeah, in India, most social entrepreneurs are very wary of the government, and they're very happy if the government stays away and just doesn't interfere. We had a small case of intervention by the government in microfinance, and you've seen what has been the result of that. So, but jokes apart, I think one of the tricky points here is that you're dealing with very vulnerable sections of society. And this whole idea of a for-profit model where you're also trying to make money and also backed by a lot of private equity investment, which is also coming from outside, is a sensitive issue. And generally, the government's view has been very negative on that. So on one side, there's been this, India has been slightly left of the center for the last 10 years in terms of policies, where the government has been itself trying to dole out money. So there have been very large programs of the government where they themselves want to distribute money directly in the hands of the poor. On the other side, they have set up funds, etc. So not so much through policy and law, but through actual funding. So they have set up specific funds of reasonably large sizes, which are again to be administered through the government bodies. And they carry their own inefficiencies. So these funds get created of fairly large size, but nothing ever happens out of those funds. They just lie there. So that has been an issue in India. Government recognizes there is a lot that needs to be done. There's a section of the government which feels that they should do it themselves. There's another part which encourages private participation, and also there is active funds that are created, but disbursement out of those funds rarely happens. So you still find, we organize the Sankalp Forum in India, which gets together various social enterprises. There is sufficient private sector interest. So this year at Sankalp, there were as many as 114 investors. Last year, there was almost about 140 million that was invested in social enterprises without any government intervention. So as far as the social enterprises are concerned, they are quite happy if the government stays away. Tax breaks, etc. Yes, there is a similar tax break for IT companies in India as well. None for social enterprises. There's been some talk of policy around defining what is a social enterprise and creating a separate category and doing that. But I think that's a very, very far distance away.
Did you want to elaborate on any of the government perspective? Any policy
Well, for the what we're proposing currently in Congress is for the passage of the what we call the present bill. It basically tries to identify who are the emerging social enterprises. It's more of a an effort to not really single out those who are pretending to be social entrepreneurs, but providing an incentive for these enterprises to scale up and have some sort of funding initiatives. And to a certain extent, there's a prioritization when it comes to private public sector partnerships so that they don't lose out to, let's say, bigger corporations during the bidding process for government contracts. And there's also what I mentioned, the Barangay Micro Business Act that provides tax relief to small, it's really not for social enterprises per se, but for small emerging enterprises who are not really capable of paying the bigger taxes for the government.
Yes, just very quickly, as I mentioned a lot about Thai government already, but just a quick thing to mention that I think from Thailand, the government look at this as part of a liberal socio-economic development programs. So the idea is not really to come and play on this thing themselves, but actually to create some infrastructure that promote private sector participation. Actually, in the master plan, there's a whole section on creating private sector incentive, and in terms of like, tax through the Board of Investment and different other interesting schemes that they're trying to play. But I mean, those things are still being developed with the Thai Social Enterprise Office. It's still in the Ministry of Finance in a proposing stage. So eventually, I think some of those measures should be out. And I think the most important thing the government try to do in Thailand is simply to say that social enterprise is a legitimate issue, or kind of organization, and should be recognized, because we can see that after the government come up with this board and some activities, then suddenly we see different big companies actually set up social enterprise themselves, or different groups are supporting thing. But another critical thing I think is to look at is that what kind of need do we need the government to help. For example, I think a lot of social enterprise are still at a very early stage, and many of them are not quite ready in terms of super investment readiness. Like they can't really go to talk to fund and get the money out within few months. They might need to have 6 months to almost a year time to get things ready for investments and so on, and capacity development in the process. And I think most of the impact investment funds that at least that we know of seems they all are saying like, oh, they kind of underestimate that particular cost in due diligence all the way to capacity for growth. So that's something that, with the government recognizing this, and they can actually finance part of this capacity development kind of thing through other organizations, and give this message so that they can create a partnership where private sector can come and support that kind of capacity development thing.
Thanks, Sunit. Are there any questions or feedback from the audience? See a hand here. Would you mind just stepping up to the microphone there, adjusting it as you need to? Can you let the panel know who you are? And if your question is targeted at one person in particular, just indicate that. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Vi. I'm from the Philippines. This question is for anybody or for everybody. Okay. Given the fact that social entrepreneurs or social enterprises, or as we call it in the Philippines, SEs, are mostly community-based at present, in a span of 5, 10, 15 years maybe, do you see these SEs to be directly competing with mainstream big stakeholders and possibly changing the landscape of the subsector economies of your country, given the right combination of talent, government support, and funding? Thank you.
I think in India, what we found is that the community-based models haven't been that successful. And like he was saying, there is a lot of corporate action in these areas. And in effect, there is no legal entity per se called a social enterprise. This is just a classification that is given based on which area they're working. So in effect, they are like a normal corporation. The only difference is maybe in size. And what we are noticing is that some of these successful social enterprises will become large corporates by themselves. And many of the large corporates are entering this area. So what I see likely to happen is that this will sort of merge into each other because there will be, we believe there is a large business opportunity there, and the corporates will move in that direction, and the successful so-called social enterprises themselves will become large corporates over a period of time.
I think for the case of the Philippines, I would like to be very optimistic about it. There's a possibility for that to happen, to grow beyond community-based, but I am not sure whether it will take place within the next 5 to 10 years, given that the sector is still very young and it's still emerging. At this point, we're still gaining interest among stakeholders, and for us to steer the sustained interest takes quite some energy and effort. So like I said, I want to highlight that I want to be very optimistic about it, and there is a potential, but it's not really visible within the next couple of years.
Another question, perhaps? Anyone?
I'll take one. Yeah. If I get up here. Hi, I'm James Norris. I'm a serial social entrepreneur, and I'm from Texas, but I came to Singapore 3 years ago because I thought Singapore could be Asia's social Silicon Valley. And now I've come to realize that there may be multiple places around the region that could be some epicenter of social. So I'm curious where you think the multiple centers could be, or the first one, the biggest. Just curious in your thoughts on where our home is.
Bangladesh, India.
I personally would not really like to think in terms of a home, but I can speak for Bangladesh in the sense that, Bangladesh has spawned off a lot of social innovations like BRAC and Grameen. And one of the big reasons that it has been able to do that is what Mr. Agrwal was basically talking about, that the government, staying out of the way. So what has spawned a lot of innovative activities within the NGO sector in Bangladesh is that the government has basically, from the very beginning, kind of taken a hands-off approach. And right after Bangladesh was created in 1971, the government was basically sort of torn apart. So it's the NGOs that came up and basically started rebuilding the country. So from that history onwards, the government has been sort of, somewhat respectful of the NGOs and then sort of kept their hands off. And the big advantage of that situation is that you can actually, because a lot of the social enterprises we're talking about are doing a lot of experimental stuff. And in countries where there is a lot of regulations that you need to think about, it's hard to do experimentations. Like in the case of in my company, and we're actually trying to do a lot of, remote healthcare. And in many countries, we have actually operated in several countries. And in the end, we decided to focus on Bangladesh for the foreseeable future, because we've been actually able to experiment with remote, doctor's advice in Bangladesh. And we have not been able to do that in Africa. We have not been able to do that even in India, where there's just so many medical regulations, ethical regulations that we have to think about. And then a lot of NGOs are actually quite scared of what the government would come and do, which is absolutely not the case in Bangladesh. The government, as far as regulations like for these things are concerned, the NGO doesn't really think too much about. So I think that's a big advantage when it comes to Bangladesh, when it comes to innovative, experimental things to try out.
Are there any other hotspots, whether it's in your country or another country?
I have a slightly different take to this. I think the need is so when we are talking about underserved markets and people who have been denied access to services, instead of centralization and creating these hubs, I think we need to go deeper. And I think possibly what effort needs to take place is to actually see how you can take it deeper rather than taking it to a place like Singapore or Bombay or Bangkok. How can you actually create these regional or even in rural centers, how do you create these social enterprise activity? and create an environment that is thriving. And one of the efforts that we are trying to do within Intellecap, so for instance, Sankalp is something that we used to hold in Bombay. We are trying to conduct it in the poorest state in India, in Bihar, and trying to see how we can get social enterprise. So one of the things that I had mentioned earlier was that many of the people who are doing very good work in this area are undiscovered. And I think a lot of capacity building, incubation centers, etc., need to be out there on the ground rather than at some central hub.
I understand that the other sessions have broken up and we have to prepare for the final program. But before we do that, did you have any thoughts, Tieza, Sunit, on the hotbeds for social enterprise development in Asia?
Just quickly, I agree that maybe we should forget about the country, but maybe the hotspot should be like the whole Asia. I don't know, at least from the Southeast Asian and East Asian point of view, I mean, we don't have such a big market as India or Bangladesh from the lower income side. So if there's some way we can integrate our market through the social enterprise in terms of trading or investment, you know, creating like an enterprise that imports something from Philippines but actually do something in Thailand for Japanese market or Korean market in sustainable tourism, fair trade, and all these kind of exciting growth sector, then it would be really interesting, yeah.
Well, just very briefly, I think it's important to look at Asia as an ecosystem hub for all social enterprises and not in a very particular regional setting. We have to realize that in every part of Asia, there's a different context. In Bangladesh, in India, Philippines, and elsewhere, it's entirely different. So we have to take Asia as a whole, as a region, not in terms of country-specific, hotbed initiative. So I think that's my point on that.
Tieza, you have the last word on this session, which clearly could go on for a few more hours, but we have the final program coming up soon and then the reception to follow. Would you please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their insights on different countries? And thank you for joining us this afternoon. I think we have just one more thing to take care of. Yeah?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Impact Forum, I would like to present this small gift as a token of our appreciation to each of the panelists. Thank you very much.